This weekend's project is the window wiper shroud or cowling, whatever you want to call this thing. So this plastic piece that goes on there, and the window wiper mechanism is underneath, and then it comes up through there and operates your window wipers. So this is just a plastic cover for that assembly system. What you have is you've got some studs down in here, and then you have these fasteners like this, and you would just find that stud, line it up, and press it on by hand, and that's what holds the top portion. There's no fasteners on this bottom portion. In fact, what it would be is like a weather stripping that goes on here, and it kind of holds this lip of the shroud or the cowl to the body metal here. So that's what holds it here, and then you've got the fasteners that hold it up the top. Could you get yourself a tool like this, or a flat blade screwdriver, or a metal scraper or something like that, and you could either go in from behind here where the window is and the shroud or the cover, or you could just work at it right there, and then you just work at it until you pry it up and lift it off. All it is those little serrated pieces in there that are contacting the threads on the stud underneath. So this is the problem. What happened is because this doesn't secure really well, I'm missing a bunch of these things. Because I'm missing those fasteners, it's not holding it down very good, and you can see right here where it's cracked, and I think that's because we're missing fasteners from holding this thing down, and I don't know where you would get replacement pieces like this. So the first thing I did was just kind of move that out of the way so we can kind of see in behind here, and you can see where those are our studs. And I'll show you what I got going on the bench here. I made these little couplers here. So it's got the fine thread on the bottom, and it's gonna have a coarse thread on the top. So this is the little coupler that I made, and that was the height that I measured it, so that this is where the bottom of the shroud or the cowl will be contacting this coupler. I can't thread that down all the way because the way I have it planned is I'm gonna use a bolt to thread from the top to thread it down in there. Because of that, what I did was I just made this little spacer here. So I thread that down, and then I'll just get in here with the angle grinder, and I'm gonna cut the end of the stud off. And after I cut the end of the stud off, the bottom with the fine thread will thread onto what's left of that stub there, and that's what's going to hold it and line it up and keep it in place. And then I can use a bolt, just a regular 1/4 inch bolt, to fasten into here. One of my thoughts is that that's a dead hole down there, and you could get filled up full of junk and stuff. So I drilled these holes here, and the idea would be is if you had a bunch of crap in there that you needed to get out, maybe what you could do is you could spritz it with some water and get some compressed air and kind of blow it out, and then it would have a place to come out the bottom. Whether that works or not, that's the purpose of it. So once we've fitted everything together, I do believe what I'll do is I'll just tack weld this. I just put 2 little tacks on there to hold it in place so it's not going to come loose or anything like that. And then we should be able to fasten our shroud down fairly easily. Now the other problem is that it's plastic and we don't want it to break. I'm going to put like a rubber gasket on this end, and then I'm going to have a rubber gasket on the bolt that fastens into here. We've got our couplers, we've got our bottom gaskets, we've got our bolts, and then we've got our gaskets that will go onto the bolt and washer there. You can see that right here. It's just a little piece of rubber. We used a punch to fit and build to fit this bolt. And we did the same thing here, and the rubber will go onto our coupler here, and then our bolt will thread into that. And if everything works the way it's supposed to, then what we'll have is the rubbers will contact the plastic instead of the metal, and hopefully we won't have anything breaking. I think what I have to do though is, when I was measuring it, that space right in there, that is for the hole in the cowl. So here's the hole in the cowl, and here's that little recess, and that's what that's for. That's supposed to fit inside there. It's also supposed to be the thickness of the cowl. So what I'm gonna have to do is when I use that rubber, is I'm gonna have to machine that down further to accept the rubber and also the thickness of the cowl. And then that way, we shouldn't have any metal contacting the plastic, which would create a stress point and cause it to crack or break, especially in the weather extremes. So I'm gonna try it with that, and then I also have another option too. And our other option is over here where we have our bolts and our nuts. In this case, I would take my bolt here and I would thread it down into our coupler until it bottoms out, which would be at this hole here, because that's where the threads change. This is coarse up top and that's fine down below. Now once I got it there, I would cut the end of the head off, and then we would use a stud instead of a bolt. I would want to use some red Loctite to keep that in there so it's not going to come loose. Then the nut and the rubber washer, same system again, rubber washer top and bottom. Only difference is now you're using a nut instead of a bolt. Either way, they serve the same purpose. Here's the pins after we remachine that recess down there for the gasket. And then with the gasket on, now we've got some room for some clamping force there. We've installed all of them here. We cut down those pins and we installed our couplers all the way across. They actually tighten down pretty good once they hit the bottom here. They're pretty snug, so might not have to tack them with the welder. Here's the final install here. We got all them bolts but one fastened on. I left that one out so that you can see that the pin comes into the hole there, and it's actually not quite flush, so we've got some clearance in there. And then we would put our bolt with our rubber washer on there. So we would thread that in by hand, and then we would just hand tight with the ratchet and socket. So these end up being 7/16 because the pins that I made, or the couplers that I made, were tapped out to 1/4 inch coarse thread on the top for these bolts. And then I just chased the stud, which was a metric fastener. I chased that with a 1/4 inch fine thread die to get the threads, so the bottom part of the coupler would thread onto the body, and then the top part would accept these 1/4 inch bolts. Once you've put on your weather stripping that goes on there, that would be good. And in fact, if you didn't want to, what you could do when you're installing this, you could probably run a bead of silicone underneath of this thing to seal it if you chose to do that. The fit test works on it, everything's good. I'll take it off again. I'm probably gonna tack them couplers down just to be sure that we're not gonna have anything come loose or anything like that. And then we'll put our window wiper mechanism back in, and then we'll do the final install. But as it sits right now, I think it turned out pretty good.